Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate and Ridge Lending Group.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to Get Rich Education. You're creating wealth for yourself for the 77th week and 77th episode. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, but you're not here for me, you're here for you. So I hope that you've lived an abundant week as usual. Now look, if you want to know about all the best websites and resources so that you can save money on your laundry detergent and your beef jerky, well then I cannot help you. We don't do that here. Why focus on cutting your expenses and living below your means when it's much more powerful to instead expand your means? You can only cut so much to the downside. Instead, expand your upside. There's unlimited room for improvement there, and you're living better there anyway. If you want to learn how to be debt-free, this is not the show for you either. It does not pay to be debt-free today, okay? You want to leverage good debt to your advantage. Being debt-free is lame. It's being financially free that's powerful, all right? Now, for the last 3 weeks, I've run the mic solo here, and to kind of change that up, we've got a great guest today. And in fact, he's someone whom I consider one of the pioneers of the national turnkey real estate investing model, and he's become quite a friend. And, I bet you're going to see that he and I are pretty closely aligned on the way that we approach investing, approach how to get a great return, and maybe most importantly, how we value our return on time invested. You're going to find out just what his definition of turnkey real estate investing is and why turnkey is so compelling and attractive to so many people. You're going to find out what he thinks are the best buy and hold real estate markets today geographically. And you're going to find out what this pioneer's 10 rules for successful real estate investing are today. We're going to get into all of that. And, of course, another reason I love today's guest is that just like you, he's a dutiful GRE listener himself, okay? And my guest is someone like me as well, in that he was investing in real estate before and during the financial crisis and the mortgage meltdown of 2008 and 2009. You really want to listen to people like us because it's easy to get around real estate gurus that are wildly optimistic about appreciating real estate, but they don't have their perspective tempered with what happens when a real estate market goes down in value. So today's guest and I each have that experience, so let's meet him. Our next guest is an investor, author, and the founder of Norada Real Estate Investments, a nationwide provider of turnkey cash flow rental properties. If you've been listening for a while, you've heard Norada's name on our show before. Since launching the business in 2004, our guest's company has helped hundreds of real estate investors create wealth and cash flow through real estate. Welcome to Get Rich Education, Marco Santarelli.
Hey, thanks, Keith. Great to be here.
Hey, it's great to finally have you here. It seemed like we were going to do this quite a while ago, and it's a good thing that we've got you here and we're doing this. So how did you get started and found Norada?
Well, what happened is back in early 2000s, I had been one of the many victims that had suffered from the NASDAQ implosion. I believe it was March of 2001, if I remember correctly. And I was a co-founder of a quote-unquote .com type of business back then, and we had VC funding somewhere in the neighborhood of $9.5 million. And we had a great company, but unfortunately the VC funding dried up, and so I had to lay off 100 plus people. And at that point, I didn't want to go back to doing some of the things I was doing in the past, although I had started real estate investing personally at the age of 18. So I took 2 years off, and come 2003, I got an email around the summertime from someone named Robert G. Allen. And I think some of your listeners might know who he is, but yes. For those that don't, you can go to Amazon.com and type in Robert G. Allen, and you'll see that he's the author and co-author of about 15 to 20 books. So he's considered one of the godfathers of nothing down real estate. So I get this email, and it was 2 or 3 day seminar on a weekend in near Anaheim, California. And I thought, okay, well, I'm an investor. I love real estate. Maybe this is something I want to go back into on a full-time basis. So I went to this seminar, and it was amazing, Keith. The ballroom had over 1,500 people, and this was their very first weekend seminar. But it was a great experience. I was riveted to my seat. Everybody there was literally, well, figuratively riveted to their seat because their speaker, a guy named Glenn, was just so engaging. And he really, really had people interested in getting involved in real estate. Now, if you remember, back in the early 2000s, around 2003, real estate was really taking off. And everybody was talking about it. It was in the newspapers, it was on the radio. And especially here in coastal California, real estate prices were really taking off. So to try and make a really long story short here, everybody that day was running to the back of the room with their credit cards in hand, signing up for these $15,000, $25,000, and $35,000 workshops or boot camps. And what was funny about that is that you were just paying for the workshops, which were peppered around the United States. You still had to pay for your flight, your accommodations, and your meals to get there. So I pulled out my credit card as well. I had nothing else to do. So I thought, okay, well, I might as well go and take these workshops. And I did. And to answer your question about how I ended up starting Norada Real Estate Investments is this. In the process or the course of taking these boot camps, people were still coming to me asking me, Marco, I noticed you're buying a bunch of property. Where are you finding these deals? How are you negotiating them? How are you structuring it? Where are you getting your financing? It was crazy because this was, I thought, the stuff they were supposed to be learning in these boot camps and workshops.
Right.
But they were coming to me asking for help. And I kind of saw a light bulb go off where I identified a need for what we now call today, a turnkey investment model, a turnkey investment opportunity, something that is more or less on a silver platter. So it was really just through that process of investors coming to me asking for help that I identified that need out in the market where people really don't have the time, knowledge, or expertise to do it on their own, regardless of how much education they get. So they need someone to help them like a coach.
Yeah. Now, you live in Southern California, a place that notoriously has poor cash flow and laws that tilt toward tenants rather than toward landlords and investment property owners. So what Norada Real Estate does is you found a way to go ahead and offer turnkey real estate to investors in many of the best U.S. markets. And you aren't just geographically confined to one market where you're always trying to sell that one market.
Exactly. And so in the People's Republic of California here, it's definitely not landlord friendly. And that's one of the reasons why I don't touch the state of California, even though we're based out of California. Our company operates in 10 to 12 other markets that are landlord friendly, where the numbers make sense and the property values are not overpriced and affordability is low. So yeah, California is not, in my opinion, a place to invest for cash flow, nor is it really a place to invest for prudent rental properties. It is a speculative market. It's what I call a cyclical market, as many of the coastal markets of the United States are. So, but yeah, this is a place where you could have done well, very well in the early 2000s. And to some degree after the bust of 2008, even though still we had very high property values.
All right. So coming off the Robert Allen seminar days, back then we were kind of in, I kind of think of those days there, the early 2000s, as kind of the advent of turnkey real estate investing. And turnkey, that's become such a popular buzzword. And as often happens, when you have a popular, compelling buzzword like that, where you can invest directly and yet be passive in real estate by doing turnkey real estate investing, that term kind of gets worn down and diluted and abused somewhat. What's your definition of turnkey real estate investing, Marco?
Keith, I'm going to break your question down into two separate questions because I actually did a podcast episode, my own podcast episode, on this exact topic. So the first question that I'll answer is, what is a turnkey real estate investment? And then we can talk about the investing portion of it. An investment is turnkey. In our definition, an investment that is in the right market, in the right neighborhood, it's the right property that is tenant occupied and professionally managed. Now, there are some other factors, but This goes to one of my 10 rules of successful real estate investing, which is taking a top-down approach. So you want to be in the right market, a market that makes sense, that is sound economically and fundamentally. Then within that market, you now look for neighborhoods that meet your investment goals and criteria, something that makes sense, that's got the right amenities. And once you've identified the right neighborhood, now you can start identifying properties that make sense. Now, those could be new construction. Those can be newly refurbished or rehabbed homes, or you could be plucking properties off the MLS and what we call a rent ready. And that's not to be confused with a property that is completely turnkey. I differentiate those things because rent ready means something that is not necessarily new or like new or newly refurbished. It could be something that's just clean, safe, functional, maybe affordable, and a tenant can move in. So once you've identified the market, the neighborhood, the property, now you want a good, qualified, and well-screened tenant placed in that property by a full-service professional property management company. So that's my definition of a turnkey real estate investment. And now just to kind of piggyback on that, a turnkey real estate investment from an investment perspective, or in other words, what is turnkey real estate investing? Well, it's taking everything I just said and working with a consultant or a provider or a professional or a company that can provide you all the pieces of the puzzle that you need. So they're going to give you everything I just described, plus they're going to have the team that you need to make it happen, such as mortgage bankers, mortgage brokers, and other lenders, home inspectors, insurance companies, property management companies. Those are the key. Those 4 resources are the key. But in addition to that, it's someone who can actually take you by the hand, answer your questions, and help guide you to the right market, right neighborhood, right property, based on what your investment goals and your criteria are. So that is what we'll call turnkey real estate investing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction to make. I think that sounds about perfect. That's what turnkey ought to mean. Everything is done for you. Just turn the key and it's done. It is tenanted. It is already fully rehabbed, and it is already under competent property management. Sometimes you see these companies and they offer turnkey real estate investments, but the property isn't quite complete with its renovation by the time that it's sold to you, and then the renovation typically takes longer than one thinks. And oftentimes that investor buyer, they cannot get a 30-year mortgage on renovated properties, so they have to go borrow money from a private lender and then later do a second closing once the property's habitable. So, there's just so many cons to going ahead and diluting what turnkey real estate investing really is supposed to mean.
Yeah, if you're an active real estate investor, you're taking the role of finding, acquiring, rehabbing, managing, even funding that renovation. Well, you're no longer a passive real estate investor. That's really the definition and the difference between active and passive real estate investing. But it's very difficult to fund, if not impossible, to fund an acquisition that is not in good condition. There's going to be an appraisal and an inspection done on every single property. And if it's not in good condition or like new, you're not going to get conventional financing. You're not going to get your 30-year fixed rate mortgages on that. There was one other comment I wanted to make about turnkey real estate investing. I think it's important for listeners to know. Some people think that you are completely disconnected when you're involved in turnkey real estate investing, and you're not. You have to be engaged. You're still part of that process. So even though it's close to a done for you model, it's a little bit more like a done with you model. And it's important for listeners to understand that you still need to work with a lender and fill out an application and submit information. You still need to ask questions. You still need to do your due diligence. And a lot of that work is front loaded. It's done within the first 30 to 60 days of the process. And then after that, it becomes very passive. But even so, even 6 months after you've closed escrow, you're still not completely 100% passive. You still have to be engaged. You're going to get a check every month. You have to check the statement. You have to log it into your system, however you're tracking it. So even if it's 5 minutes a month, you're still engaged. You still want to be on top of it. And plus, you want to communicate with your property manager from time to time. If you maintain that low level of engagement, you're going to be on top of your real estate investments. You'll know what's going on. You'll be in control, and you'll be well on your way to building a portfolio.
I really like the way you put that, Marco. Turnkey real estate investing is sort of a done with you model rather than a done for you model. I kind of think of it as passive real estate investing. Passive doesn't necessarily mean completely uninvolved. I think turnkey probably appeals to me and appeals to a lot of our listeners so much because I think of it as kind of the sweet spot between expending very little of your time, but yet getting all of the returns from direct real estate investing yourself, where you do get leverage appreciation and you do get cash flow and you do get the benefit of loan amortization paid down by the tenants and you do get the benefit of all of the tax breaks. If you invest in someone else's syndication, you don't necessarily get all those things and your return gets watered down. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you want to manage property yourself, your life could get crazy. So turnkey real estate investing really gives the best of both. That's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah. And you know what? You bring up a good point. There are a lot of people out there that will argue against investing in a quote unquote turnkey investment or something that is as passive as possible. And I get into these arguments with people sometimes, not necessarily on the phone. They never call us because that's their stance. But in some of the online forums, there are people that are so convinced that the only way to truly invest is to be hands-on, roll up your sleeves and be an active investor. And they're the ones that are out there looking for the deals or going to auctions or negotiating with distressed sellers or finding those distressed properties. And then once they have that property, now they're going to manage their contractor or subcontractors to go in and do the work and fix it up. And their hope in spending all that time, energy, money, knowledge, and hopefully they have all four, is that they're going to have a property at the end of it all where they actually have more equity in that property than they would have if they had purchased a turnkey property. Right. But the give and the take there is that you've just invested your time, your knowledge, your resources, your cash, and taken on the risk in the hopes of building a 5 or 10 or maybe a 15% equity position in that new property. Can that happen? Sure, it happens every day, but not necessarily with everybody all the time. If you've got experience and knowledge and you've got the right team, sure, you can do it and you can make it happen more often than not. But let's face it, at the end of the day, Keith, there are many, many, many people out there, and these are the people that we typically get the calls from. I'd say 95% of the people that call us are new investors that don't have that expertise or the knowledge, or they're seasoned professionals or they're seasoned real estate investors. But at the bottom of it all, the bottom line is that they don't have the time. So they may have the knowledge or the experience, they may have the cash capital credit, but they don't have the time. They want to spend that time with their family, their friends, going to their soccer, their son's soccer game on the weekends. They work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, but they don't have the time. And so they come to us to help them get to where they want to go, achieve their real estate investing goals with our help.
Not always, but often, do-it-yourselfers don't ask themselves the question, what's my time worth? The most successful investors and the successful people are constantly asking themselves, what's my time worth? So, when we come back, we're going to talk to Marco, who has been offering turnkey real estate investing longer than almost anyone else in the United States. He's going to give us his 10 rules for successful real estate investing. We're going to talk about the markets that make sense today. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Norada Real Estate Investments' Marco Santarelli. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Cash flow real estate investors, this is Get Rich Education's Keith Weinhold. Did you know that you can finance up to 35 income properties all with one lender? Ridge Lending Group specializes in investment property loans, and they do it in almost every U.S. state. Ridge has worked with tens of thousands of real estate investors and homeowners all over the country. They've been doing this for investors for so long that at this point, they've helped more families realize their dreams of becoming real estate investors than any other mortgage lender in the country. To find out more, visit ridgelendinggroup.com.
Are you looking for a roadmap to financial freedom? If so, we have a solution for you. Norada Real Estate is offering a limited number of free strategy sessions to help you get out of the rat race. Learn how you can create wealth and build monthly passive income. To set up a time with one of our knowledgeable investment counselors, simply go to noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
This is Cashflow Diaries Jay Massey. Do the right thing, then do things right. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our featured guest, Norada Real Estate Investments, Marco Santarelli, noradarealestate.com. Marco, you have 10 rules for successful real estate investing. Tell us about those.
Okay, Keith. So When I got back into real estate investing in late 2003, early 2004, I was so excited and I kind of got caught up in the euphoria. I actually coined the term back then because I was helping a lot of investors and I was working with some real estate agents, and I coined this term, the high of the buy. There were people that were so excited after going to these seminars and boot camps and whatnot that they would have bought almost anything. And, believe it or not, I made the mistake of getting caught up in that. And there were many properties that I bought that I made mistakes on. There were properties that I never had inspected and that came to haunt me after the fact. I got ripped off by thousands and thousands of dollars by my property managers. So there were a lot of things that I had learned through trial and error that allowed me to come up with some of these rules. So I always put education as number one. It's at the top of the list for a reason. And so my first rule is educate yourself, because knowledge is the new currency. And Robert Kiyosaki talks about this too. If you don't educate yourself, you're really doomed to follow other people's advice. And you don't know if what they're telling you is good or bad advice. You don't know if what they're telling you is real or if they're leading you down the wrong path. But let's just say you do educate yourself. By continually educating yourself and building on your education, your knowledge, you will go from being a good investor to becoming a great investor. So it's very important that you continually educate yourself. I try and read every day. I listen to podcasts like yours. I do whatever I can to educate myself. And I think that's a very valuable skill to have, especially in today's day and age where information's coming at us left, right, and center.
That's where your return on time invested increases over time when you're engaged and educated.
Exactly. Yes. And then podcasts make that very easy, which is part of the reason why I started a podcast last year. So the second rule is to set investment goals. Now, people hear about setting goals from everybody all the time, and to the point where I think they discount it. But the reality is that you have to set a goal or some goals, because if you don't, all you have is a wish, and you'll never get to where you want to go if you're just trying to get there on a wish. So if you want to be financially free or wealthy or rich, you have to set those goals, because ultimately those goals become a roadmap. If you write them down clearly and specifically, you can make an action plan out of that and break it down and down and down to the point where you have it granular enough where you can make it into a checklist and check them off. And as you check off each box, you're one step closer to achieving that goal. So goals are very important. And we suggest that investors write down where they want to invest, how many properties they want to achieve, or maybe it's an income goal. You can make it as detailed as you want, and you don't have to spend days doing this. You could just sit down for 5 or 10 minutes and just jot something down. Doing something is better than doing nothing, because execution is where the rubber meets the road and you're going to get things done.
Yeah, and that could be setting 3-month goals, 1-year goals, 5-year goals. That could be goals for how much property you want to buy, how many different geographic markets you want to invest in, and so on.
Yeah, your goal could be to sit down for 10 minutes tomorrow to write your goals down. It could be that simple. So my third rule is to never speculate. And back in the early 2000s, we've seen so many people buying property, in Nevada and Phoenix, in California, in Florida, and they were quote unquote investing. But the reality is that's not investing. That's speculating on the market and hoping that you can accumulate equity through appreciation because you're just riding a wave. Well, the problem is twofold. Number one, in most of those cases, there wasn't any cash flow. In fact, in many of those cases, I know many people who were buying properties, and often they were new construction homes, and all they were doing is building them over a 6 to 12 month period and flipping them to someone else at the end of it all. So they never even had a tenant, let alone negative cash flow. They just had no cash flow. When you are buying property to flip in the hopes of gaining equity through appreciation, you're just speculating. It's a gamble. And you just don't know when that market's going to reach a top. And you won't know for at least 6 to 9 months after the fact. So speculating is different than investing. And people need to understand that when you have positive cash flow, now you've got an investment. The fourth is invest for cash flow. So this kind of piggybacks off the last one. There are very few exceptions to this, but generally speaking, you want to have a positive cash flow. So when you're buying property, you want the tenant to be paying all the expenses and the debt service on that property. Whatever's left over, that net cash flow is your profit. You can spend it, you could reinvest it, do whatever you want, but it's very important to have that cash flow. I sometimes call cash flow the glue that keeps your investment together, because the equity will happen over time. Like the real estate guys say, equity happens. Well, it does, because your mortgage is paid off. You have that amortization, but then you have the bonus or the icing on the cake of appreciation. And these happen slowly but surely over time. And while that's happening, as you're getting wealthier in your sleep, you have that cash flow that's holding your deal together and paying off all those expenses and overhead. So invest for cash flow, very important.
Cash flow solves a lot of problems. And I'm sure you would agree, Marco. Don't even buy a property unless it produces positive income for you, or it's expected to on day one. That's rent income minus all your expenses, vacancy, insurance, maintenance, taxes, management, utilities, everything from day one.
Exactly. That's right. So fifth is be market agnostic. We have a guiding principle in our company that we are completely agnostic, not just market agnostic. So we're not married to any market or any provider or property manager or inspector or lender. We just work with the people that serve our clients well. But going back to being market agnostic, the United States is made up of over 400 metropolitan statistical areas, or MSAs. And all of these markets are local. So what happens in this market is not connected to what happens in another market. Whatever's happening in Detroit is not the same as what's happening in Anchorage, Alaska, and it's not the same as what happens in San Diego, California. So it's important to disconnect yourself and realize that every market stands on its own. And when one market's going up, the other one may be going down, because they all have their individual factors. And a lot of this is based around jobs, job growth, migration rates, both organic and net migration coming in from other markets. But when you find a healthy market based on its fundamentals, it's got a healthy housing market, it's an affordable market, its economics are sound. My sixth rule is to take a top-down approach. And what that means is that you start with the market in mind. Many investors make the mistake of getting married to a property because they're presented with this deal, and the property looks great. It has good curb appeal. It was an extensive renovation job. The numbers on paper look great, or maybe there's a tenant in there and the actuals look great. But what they don't realize is that this may be in a depressed market. It may be in a neighborhood that's a war zone where most of the properties are dilapidated. I hate to pick on Detroit, but I use it because I have personal experience there.
Everyone else picks on it.
Yeah, well, why not then? Okay. But I have personal experience in Detroit. I've actually bought a lot of property there in years past. And when they call it a war zone, I mean, that's exactly what it looks like. I mean, there are streets and streets of dilapidated and burnt down properties. But, you will find some really nice properties peppered all around. Now, that property looks great. The cash flow is great. It could be a stabilized property where the tenant's in place and management's got it under control. But, when you stand back and you look around, you kind of scratch your head and you think, well, do I really want to be here? And is this the right place to be long term? It doesn't look like there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of jobs. Maybe the crime rate's high. So you can't disconnect the property from the neighborhood nor from the market. They're joined at the hip. So taking a top-down approach means what I was just talking about before. Start with a market that makes sense, that it's got a healthy housing market and a strong local economy. And from there, you narrow things down to the best neighborhoods. You could look at amenities, schools, crime rates, renter demand. How large is that rental pool? What's the percent of owner-occupied homes in that area? What is the breakdown of the demographics? For example, are they made up of mostly professionals? Are they made up of blue-collar, factory workers? You got to look at all these things. And just to kind of stretch this a little bit further, a friend of mine, Jay, likes to categorize these people into three types. I've kind of changed his model a little bit, but you got to ask yourself the question, who do you want to service? Do you want to service Walmart clients? Do you want to service Macy's clients? Or do you want to service Nordstrom's clients? The answer to that question will dictate what type of neighborhood that you're going to be in when you build your real estate portfolio. So I know that was a mouthful, Keith, but that's all kind of chalked into that take a top-down approach.
Well, that's a great way to think about it. A top-down approach. I mean, as far as what's up at the top, it's not the property. And a lot of people do want to start with that property. The property is pretty down low on list of investor criteria. I think it starts with you, the investor. Who are you? Then you look at the market. Then you look at the submarket, which is the neighborhood. And as long as you have some other fundamentals in place and you have sound management, only then do you begin looking at the property, which is like the fourth or the fifth thing down your list.
Right. So in a few words, don't do it the other way around. Always start with the market and work your way down. Don't start with a property and then try to justify the purchase of the property by going up to the neighborhood and the macroeconomic levels. So number 7 is diversify across markets. And people talk about diversifying when they talk about investing. What is your portfolio mix? How much are you into stocks, real estate, bonds, this and that? Well, you could do that within real estate. Now, whether you consider real estate to be an asset class or not is irrelevant. The fact is that you're investing in real estate, income producing real estate. And the smart thing to do is to invest in different markets. And I have this kind of rule of thumb that I call 3 to 5 in, 3 to 5. It could be any number you want. This is kind of what I've lived by starting back in 2004 because I was investing in Florida, Georgia, and Michigan. And then I had some property in California already, but that's how I was diversifying. And 3 to 5 and 3 to 5 simply means that you acquire 3 to 5 properties in one market. So you're building a footprint there and you have volume with your property manager, which builds your relationship. And then you diversify by going into a different market, which is geographically different than that first market. And typically what that means is you're going into another state. And you're going to do the same thing there. You're going to acquire another 3 to 5 properties in that separate market. And you keep doing that. And you do that with a minimum of 3 markets. But I think going more than 5 is overkill. You don't need to acquire properties in more than 5 markets. You can just keep building your footprint in those existing markets until things change enough where it makes sense to divest out of that market, often doing it tax deferred through a 1031 exchange. But you can come out of a market and go back into a different market where you feel there's more opportunity or better timing.
Yeah, 3 to 5 markets, that is just perfect. That sounds about right. I've talked about that same thing on Get Rich Education. I have one friend that invests in only 2 markets, Anchorage, Alaska, and Houston, Texas, and he is concerned now about the price of a barrel of oil limiting the rental demand in those markets because he's not well diversified. I've known another investor that's owned property in 9 different states and 14 different metros, and his life is just chaos dealing with all these property manager statements and all these little pieces that he's trying to fit together. So 3 to 5 is a sweet spot.
Yeah, it is. And when people talk about risk, and I say risk in quotes because real estate is probably the one type of investment or asset that where you can control and mitigate your risk more than any other investment. This is really how you do it. You buy 3 to 5 or more properties in 3 to 5 markets, and that's how you mitigate your risk. And if you've done your due diligence on the front end by selecting those markets properly, you've probably eliminated 90 to 95% of your risk. You know, short of having the occasional tenant turnover, you're going to have a really, really good portfolio.
Yeah.
Number 8 is use professional property management. And I recommend this 99% of the time. I look at property management as a thankless job. It's really not something you want to be doing unless you enjoy it or have thick skin and you have experience. You really should be focused on your friends, family, your career, and looking for more property. Spending your time managing a property is doable. I know people who actually manage their properties from 3,000 miles away and do it successfully. And I'm not suggesting that it's not possible. But if you don't have the time, you don't have the knowledge and the experience, or you just want to stay focused on other things, the best thing you could do is use a full service professional property management company. And they will do a better job at screening, qualifying tenants, handling the landlord laws, marketing the property, dealing with tenant issues or complaints, et cetera, et cetera.
They've already got all the systems in place, from lock boxes to criminal background checks to walk-through inspections at the end of the tenancy. It's just an amazing tool for an investor to have, and it's incredible that more people don't use professional management when they can or they should.
Yeah, I agree. 9th is maintain control. The nice thing about real estate, and I'm not talking about REITs, real estate investment trusts or funds or pooled investments, but you being a direct investor is really the way to go. That's how you maintain control. You're the boss or the CEO of your company, and you determine where you're going to invest, what you're going to invest in, possibly what to ask for rent or when to do rental increases, what repairs are authorized or what those thresholds are. You have more control with real estate than you do with virtually any other true investment where there's cash flow involved. And number 10, this is a big one. These are all important, but leverage your investment capital. There are very few investments that allow you to leverage your capital. Now, with stocks, if you have a margin account, you can get up to a 50% loan against the investment, so your cash is working 2 to 1. But real estate is really the only investment where a bank lenders, banks, are almost tripping over themselves to lend you up to 80% of the purchase price of that real estate because it's good for them. It's a good deal for them. They want to lend, they need to lend. That's how they stay in business. But for you, it allows you to put as little as 20% down on a property and control 100% of that property and have 100% of the benefits with only 20% of the purchase price. And then some people say, well, okay, that's great, but I'm a little bit shy of debt, or Dave Ramsey tells me to live debt free. And, I like Dave Ramsey and I like a lot of his stuff, but this is where I really disagree with him. And I've heard that he owns investment property, like his own rental property. So does that make him a little bit of a hypocrite? I don't have no idea. But the point is this: you have the ability to borrow other people's money and leverage the acquisition, leverage your investment capital toward that acquisition. And that leverages or magnifies your overall rate of return. And thereby it accelerates your wealth creation. So why wouldn't you borrow as much as you possibly can today, especially when interest rates are as low as they are?
Yeah, absolutely. And we both know the answer is a lot of people have these antiquated notions that debt is bad, but as real estate investors, we have the ability to outsource every bit of our debt and more to tenants. And leverage is so powerful. A lot of people think there's a great deal of power in compound interest, compound interest being your principal compounds. And then after the second year, both your principal and your interest compound, and it snowballs. But you know what? Compound interest is lame and slow compared to the power of leverage, because when you're leveraging, you're also using compound interest. You're kind of leveraging your compound interest. You have both. Yeah, leverage is incredibly powerful, and it's a shame that more people don't use it or understand it when that property is secured with an income stream.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think you had a podcast episode not too long ago where you actually talked about that and compared it to leveraging real estate, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, you're a good listener, Marco.
Yes, I am loyal.
Yeah. So now, okay, so those were some great 10 rules of successful real estate investing. And within that, we've talked about how that manager piece is so important, and it's often more important than the property itself even. So now, as you deal with these different turnkey real estate investment companies in several different United States markets, how important do you find it that the turnkey seller and the property manager are in-house and that they're the same company? So that way, when a repair or a maintenance issue comes up, maybe early on for an investor within their investment in that first year, so that the turnkey seller and the manager are not pointing fingers at each other. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I know a lot of the builders and rehabbers and turnkey providers, if you will, around the country. Many of them are friends of mine, and we work with a good number of them. I think only about 15 to 20%, I'm just doing this off the top of my head, probably not more than 20% are what I call vertically integrated, meaning that they may have separate companies, but on the one hand, they're acquiring and renovating properties. And on the other hand, they're also involved in the property management, which you don't need to take. You could use any property manager you choose. But when they're integrated end to end, you basically come in on the front end, you're acquiring a property, it's tenant occupied, and then they just turn it over to their other company and they're doing the management. It's seamless. But at the same time, I will say that it's seamless in the other scenarios too, because at least the way we operate, all the properties that we have to offer are already under or at least assigned to a property management company. So from the investors, our clients' perspective, it's seamless. They're in touch with the property manager very early on, and they're already working with the providers we work with. So to your question, how important is it? It's important that it gets taken care of, but I wouldn't say that it's make or break or all important that they're vertically integrated. And the reason I say that is this: we insist that all our clients order, and we coordinate it for them, so it's not that they have to tackle it all, but we insist that they get a home inspection done by a third-party company, and they could choose whatever company they want. We give them a pick list that they can go from. But at the end of the day, if there are any issues, they're dealt with, and they're dealt with pretty quickly, because that's one of the conditions, that all purchases are subject to inspection. So that's pre-close. Now, post-close, if something comes up in the first few months, virtually every company we work with will go back, check, cure, repair, or replace whatever goes wrong. The only exception to that is if the tenant had some gross negligence and they purposely, I shouldn't say purposely, but they broke something, it was their fault, and clearly if they throw a brick through the window, that's not their responsibility. That's going to be the responsibility of the tenant and or the landlord at that point. But A lot of the properties that we sell through our network have mechanicals that are replaced. So when it comes to the HVAC, hot water tank, often the roof, sometimes plumbing, sometimes electrical, these things are often replaced. And so they have a warranty, and that kicks in for the first 2 years plus, 2 to 5 years, depending on what it is. And then as far as workmanship goes, very, very few people will have an issue with going back to the property if something has fallen apart that was fixed or replaced because screws were loose. Often that's caught with the property inspector going through the property. But if there's an issue, 99% of the time it's a non-issue. Things will get fixed or replaced. And we have enough leverage with our providers. They understand that we're agnostic. We're not married to them. So we're kind of the hand that feeds them. So they kind of bend over backwards for us. If something does come up, it's addressed pretty quick. And if it's not, it's just a simple matter of me picking up the phone and talking to them, and then they'll go back and fix it.
Just as a recap there, so these properties are often fully renovated from top to bottom when you buy turnkey, and therefore on some of the major systems like HVAC, you have a warranty that can potentially kick in. And also, it's always recommended that you get a home inspection, so that really helps hedge you against some problems. So, well, Marco, as we're kind of winding down here, why don't we just quickly hit on some markets that make sense today, 2016?
I have to preface your question first by saying that when you talk about a market that makes sense, the question is, makes sense to whom? One of the first things we always do with our clients, and this is why we offer a strategy session, even if they don't request it, this is really where we start off. We may spend an hour on the phone with them on that first call to find out what their goals are and what their criteria is. Those two things help drive everything that happens from that day forward. And that will help determine what markets make the most sense for them. So what is the best quote unquote market for you may be different for me, and it may be different for one of our clients. Generically and categorically speaking, we break markets down into two broad categories: linear markets, cyclical markets. The linear markets are your boring markets, typically in the Midwest, down through towards Texas and often east from there into Tennessee. These are markets that are boring. I like to call them boring, but they appreciate 4 to 6% on average per year over the long term. What they're doing is they're just basically keeping up with inflation. And they're not exciting markets, but they're stable markets, and they make sense for someone who's just looking to sleep well at night and have something that will just appreciate over time with inflation, but gives them good cash flow. And then you've got another type of market, which is what I call a cyclical market. And those are typically coastal markets, often Las Vegas, although Vegas and Phoenix are hybrid markets. They can do both. But when you look at cyclical markets, they're the ones that tend to appreciate rapidly and then also come down heavily and then appreciate. And they're more like a seesaw or roller coaster as opposed to kind of a flat line that's on an incline or slope, a slow slope. So having said that, we like markets like Indianapolis, Kansas City, Birmingham, Alabama, Memphis, Tennessee, and to some degree, Atlanta. I would call those linear markets. They've got good properties, good cash flow. Well, there's a lot of opportunity there. And then you've got markets that are more hybrid today, like Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, to some degree, Jacksonville, Florida. These are markets that are not fully cyclical, but over the last 2 years, they've been experiencing above normal or above average rates of appreciation. And so these markets will tend to regress to the mean, if you will, so they'll come back down.
Yeah, so just broadly, I think the investor more interested in cash flow is looking at linear markets, and maybe the one that's somewhat more susceptible to want to go on a bit of a roller coaster ride or isn't as dependent on the cash flow might go for more of a hybrid market or a cyclical market.
The markets that I just rattled off are some of the markets that we're involved in because they make sense fundamentally, economically, from a cash flow perspective and affordability. You are able to buy property. Well, let's just go high and low, from $50,000 to $150,000 for a single family detached. And those properties will typically rent for about 1% of that purchase price, which is what we call a rent to value ratio. And I know you've talked about this in prior episodes. So often you're going to find those rent to value ratios are from 0.9 to about 1.2%.
Yeah, terrific. That sounds like the sweet spot. Well, Marco, how can Get Rich Education listeners learn more about you and Norada Real Estate?
Well, thanks, Keith. I guess the best place to learn about me and our company, we kind of have it broken down into two websites. From the educational perspective, it'll be the podcast at passiverealestateinvesting.com. But if people are interested in learning more about these markets and properties that are available, That would be on our property website, which is Norada Real Estate, Norada, noradarealestate.com.
All right, that's passiverealestateinvesting.com for the education, noradarealestate.com for the properties. Marco Santarelli, thank you so much for we finally got you to come on Get Rich Education today to provide value to our audience.
Thank you so much, Keith. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, great passive and turnkey real estate investing fundamentals from Marco Santarelli. I've heard some beginners say that they think turnkey real estate investing, it just kind of seems too good to be true. They're like, now, why would someone sell property that is already fully renovated, fully tenanted, already under management, and provides cash flow from day one? Why would anyone want to sell that? Well, many of these turnkey companies, they have these systems in place. What they do is they go out and identify a distressed or a foreclosed upon property. They leverage economies of scale with contractors in their own market, and they end up making a profit themselves when they sell it to a turnkey buyer like me or you. Okay, so they do profit when I effectively buy their fix and flips. That's what I'm basically doing. I'm buying their fix and flips when I buy that turnkey real estate. So that's why someone is willing to sell it to me, and I'm happy to be that buyer and hold it for the long term. So if you want a free strategy session with one of Marco's knowledgeable investing counselors so that you can find out specifically where you're at and what you can exactly do to create passive income for yourself, go to noradarealestate.com. That's Norada realestate.com. You can find that in today's show notes as well, of course. You've heard Norada advertise on GRE for months. The rich don't have to work for money. Yes, the rich don't have to work for money. I mean, you still can if you want to, but the wealthy don't have to. And you're kind of taking a step toward passive income for yourself when you buy cash flowing turnkey real estate. Until next week, check out Norada Real Estate and don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.